My name's Edward. I've got the privilege of speaking to you right after you all have a half an hour break and some beer, so maybe that's good. I don't know, we'll see. So my name's Edward Lee. I lead a team in the analytics organization at Spotify here in New York. And I want to talk about some of the ways we visualize listening data from our 100 million plus users. So just to remind you what Spotify is, right, we're a streaming music service, an app on many different platforms. And one major thing you can imagine that we care about is how and why our users listen to music. And specifically, how do they discover music? What kind of behaviors do they exhibit when they listen to music? What are their habits around listening to music? And the purpose of knowing all this is to help us make a better, more engaging, more successful product, to do better marketing, to get more subscriptions, convert people from free to premium. Everyone's doing like the hands up thing on these talks. How many people use Spotify or have used it? So, yeah, all right. Good. I won't ask how many people subscribe. Do people like Discover Weekly? Is that a popular? Yeah, cool. Yeah. Okay, so music is what we care about. Now, just a couple words about how we're structured and the team that I'm on. We're in this kind of central analytics group. There are also smaller insights and analytics teams spread around the company in different organizations. And as an analytics team, our goal is to produce tools and insights for people to make better decisions. That's been kind of a refrain the last couple of days. In our team, we bring together in an interdisciplinary way design, tech, and research. So tech is really the data engineering and back-end engineering needed to make data products work for the massive amount of data that we've got. Our research team is data scientists and statisticians who really go deep on understanding the data. And my team is the design team. So we think deeply about data visualization, user interfaces, how to make data usable and understandable and actionable. And we make stuff for all the rest of the company, as you can imagine an analytics group does. So the big parts of Spotify are product, the teams that make the app. There's the content side, which is kind of a special part of Spotify compared to other tech companies, which is really kind of like a little music label or music company. These are all the people who do licensing, interact with labels and artists. We've got marketing, we've got revenue. So we make stuff for all of these parts of the company. So 100 million plus users. It's actually a lot more than 100 million now. That's our latest public number. This is a huge number of users and a massive, massive amount of data that they're generating each day. Billions and billions of song plays. And one way to look at this stuff is what this photo is kind of a metaphor for, this big picture view of consuming music. Oops. And we do a lot of that, this data in big aggregates where stuff is getting counted and statistically aggregated, and we visualize it in a lot of the ways that we've been seeing at this conference. We do KPI dashboards, we visualize aggregate measures. That's a big part of our job. But sometimes we also take the other route. We try to focus on a person listening to music. And I called this talk visualizing 100 million music fans or whatever it was. That was a little bit of a trick because it's a big number, but I want to focus on the music fans part. Because when you think about listening to music, it's someone having a very individual connection to that song and what an artist has created. It's a very emotional moment. There's a lot of connection to your mood. Sometimes it's just in the background. Sometimes you're having an intense connection to this thing that you've chosen to listen to. Whatever it is something that makes your life better. And we want to remember that this experience, first of all, it's not trivial for music fans, and it's not uniform. It's not uniform from one listener to the next. Different people experience music in different ways. And it's not uniform for an individual person, for you as the music listener. One day you're doing one thing, maybe even a few minutes later you're listening to music in a different way. So we want to use data and visualization to bring that view also, and supplement our big picture aggregate views with some individual views into data and music data. Capture some of that deep connection to music. So what I want to show are a couple experimental projects. These are not focusing on communication or even really direct decision making, even though that's a lot of our job in analytics. These are visualizations and tools designed to spur exploration and research, especially in our own team. So I was hoping by 4 o'clock that the beautiful sun streaming in would have gone down a little more, because it's going to wash out a lot of my slides, but hopefully we'll be able to see these. For some reason I go for like the dark background with light marks. So this first tool, this experimental thing, was created to visually explore a single user's listening history. And the approach that we took here was really just to see the data. It's not communication again. We're not trying to presume what we're going to find in there. Let's just see it in as much complexity as we can add without just making it totally insane, and start to add interactivity and parameters, some controls to let you control it and see what comes out of it. And the idea is to have this reveal things that we wouldn't have guessed just looking at aggregates or assuming what we want to be looking for ahead of time. Yeah, you can kind of see it. So this view of it is, well, actually, go back 1 second. In the interactive version, there's all these controls over on the right. You can change whose history you're looking at, what the axes are doing. If we've got time, I can switch to that interactive one and play around with it. I will say that all the data for these users is people at Spotify. We pull our own data. Everyone gave me their permission to do this, so I know that this is a little invasive and creepy, but we do this with everyone's blessing. And in fact, this is my listening history. So this shows about 4 months of listening, July to end of October. In this arrangement of it, each row is an artist. The x-axis is kind of absolute time. Each circle shows a bunch of streams at some time period. So in this case, they're kind of grouped by day. They're colored by the context that they were played on. So one context would be if you're listening within a playlist or a radio station or an artist page, a catalog page, so all the places you can get to find music. And the way the y-axis, the rows are ordered here is by when they were introduced to me, to the user. So just by throwing up this data, we can see some interesting stuff that I was surprised at the first time I saw this. I mean, first of all, there's just a lot of variety. When I think about my own consumption of music, I always want more, I always want better stuff. There might be one artist that I'm obsessed with, and I feel like I'm listening to them all the time right now. But actually, when you look at the data, I'm listening to all kinds of stuff and constantly, every day, getting 10 or 20 new artists passing through my brain. So first of all, just a lot of variety, a lot of artists in there. I mentioned Discover Weekly. Discover Weekly is the kind of magenta context colors here, and it has that signature of a bunch of new artists appearing at once. So these, it looks like that because it's, the first time the artist is introduced, they're all on the same day, and it's probably just hit play on Discover Weekly. If you don't know what Discover Weekly is, it's a weekly playlist of 30 new tracks, each one by a different artist that you haven't heard before, but that the system thinks that will fit your taste. So there's a kind of signature to that kind of listening. There's also some regular artists that I listen to frequently, and a lot of new listening going on, including a few times where someone I just discovered, then that day or a couple days later is like a big splash. But one thing that jumped out at me, especially when I compared this to other Spotifyers, other users' history, is one or two artists who are really frequent. Listen to them almost every day. So you can change one of those parameters on the interface, and instead of the x-axis being absolute time from the first day to the last, now it's time of day. The y-axis is the same. You can see it's all happening at 7:30 to 8. Right? You might think that maybe I work out at the gym and this is my gym playlist. It's not that. This is what we put our 2-year-old to sleep with almost every night. So it's kind of funny. It's a big thing here. But if you just looked at it this way and didn't have the person to follow up with and think about what does this actually mean, you might assume this is my absolute favorite artist. This should always be accessible. This artist should be featured prominently in affecting recommendations for me. Actually, I don't want to hear any of this stuff, right? I don't want it to affect any of that. So spot checking data kind of at the real human individual level, and especially if you can talk to the people, can help you uncover problems that you then need to build into the models that could be based on this kind of stuff. Okay, so but more interesting in my listening for our product is actually a behavior like this. So when you hover over them, you can see what the artist is and some details. This artist, Peaking Lights, I actually discovered them on Discover Weekly, but that first day when I played them, went from that discovery moment to their album. Probably, it says I listened to 10 tracks by them. Probably listened to the whole album, got into it, listened to them a bunch the next day or two, and then returned to that same artist, was it 4 or 5 times over the next 2 months, but would only listen to 1 or 2 tracks, which I'm guessing is because I probably saved my favorite one to a playlist. So that story that comes out here, I wouldn't have guessed that that's what that discovery looks like. But for me as a user, I know that that was an important value that Spotify was bringing to my life and my music consumption. And now I've got an idea of what does that look like? How might we think about modeling this? Obviously not basing it on just me, on one user, but what are the other signals of discovery and how discovery plays out after that moment? And see if we can start to capture and record that, aggregate it up, and see how our products are doing on this kind of metric. Oh yeah, I put lines in. All right. So here's another user's listening. Same view as that first one. She's got a lot more artists, a lot more variety and jumping around. What really struck me when I first saw this was this kind of repeated signature of these vertical lines with a similar pattern on many different days. And after thinking about it, I don't think I even needed to talk to her to confirm this. What she does is she's got one big playlist that she likes to put stuff that she finds in. And then that's kind of her go-to thing for lean back listening. Just turn that on shuffle and let it play for a couple of hours, maybe while she's working or something. So she's got this particular behavior that's not the way that I listen to playlists, but I bet there's, out of 100 million people, there might be 500,000 who like to do this or more. And she does a similar thing with discovery, though, but the destination for it is that big playlist. So here she's finding something on Discover Weekly, and then you can see it shows up in that kind of pattern on that big playlist of hers a few weeks later. So again, a different pattern of discovery and consumption, a different behavior that I wouldn't have guessed, is this something that people do that we could find, but came out pretty clearly in looking at her history. the size is how many streams at that time. So in this case, it's like on that day. It's like the bin. If we go back to this one, right, it's within half an hour or something, how many streams at that time. And this one, you can kind of also see these, where the Discover Weekly or some other stuff, the listening goes in this other pattern because it's a new artist each time, but there's like an hour and a half of listening to Discover Weekly. Okay, so I'll switch to this next project. Again, light on dark background. Hopefully you guys can see it. So this project, it's the same data actually, or very similar data. It's a bunch of individual Spotifyers, our listening history for 4 or 5 months of listening. It's grouped by each user. But here I wanted to make a simpler kind of metric and make something that's comparable between users. So how to read this chart. Each line is a session, a stretch of listening, and then you can break it up. If there's any gap without any listening for more than 15 minutes, then you cut the session there. This is a naive way of defining sessions, but kind of usefully naive, which I'll explain in a second. So each line is a session. It starts up at the top, and with each next track, goes down a step. If that track is more familiar, so an artist that you know really well, the same artist that you just listened to, it goes more to the left. If it's less familiar, if it's more of a discovery moment, like an artist you've never heard before, especially an artist that's new in this session, it goes more to the right. So putting on your favorite artist, an album by them, that's all the way to the left. Discover Weekly, again, is a good example of to the right, or a mixed playlist. There could be stuff in between, and this is actually my listening history again. I've got some stuff where I put on a favorite, some Discover Weekly style listening, but a lot of things where it's in between, where it's playlists that I make, where I put in a bunch of new stuff, but some artists have a few songs and there's a lot of repetition. Here's a different user with a pretty different pattern of their history. So he's all kind of his favorite stuff. He just puts on I happen to know that's like minimal, kind of new music, minimal composers, and he works to this stuff. So that's what his history looks like. Long sessions, remember, it's like each track is another step down. So the longer ones are all these familiar ones, a few short times, but you can kind of see where he'll start listening to something that's discovery-oriented, and then it veers off maybe when he switches to focus in on one artist. Here's someone else who has kind of bimodal listening, bimodal behavior, where it's either the discovery or the familiar, but not a lot in between. And on the other end of the spectrum, almost all discovery. This is someone who's got really long sessions. She'll put on these very mixed playlists, put them on in the background. But here's one moment where she was listening to something in that kind of discovery mode for a long time. For whatever reason, like she wanted to zero in on that artist, she liked how that sounded, so the session takes kind of a right turn. And when I said this is a kind of naive way to define sessions, this shows how we might want to construct a session metric that's about your intent. This is actually something that we spend a lot of time working on. So to model and record in the data when someone switches their mode of listening from discovery to familiarity. And I think what's really interesting here, as we've kind of already shown, is the differences between users. Not necessarily what it reveals about any one person, but that people have different behaviors, different habits, different relationships to what they're listening to. And this experiment actually, this revealed some interesting stuff. It's also kind of a nice visual technique that now we can plug in anything that's session-based, as this kind of sequential thing, and it could have a relationship of one song to the next, and can be reduced to a single continuous variable where you're stepping either to the left or the right. So this might work well for some valence metric, where is it going darker or happier music, tempo, something like that. Yeah, so these are a couple of ways that we visualized individual data to find these kinds of patterns. Like I said before, the next step to all of this is to try to figure out what's valuable in these ideas, what might apply to our customers in Spotify, the people who consume the tools and the dashboards and the data sets we create. And if these insights are valuable, how do we scale it up to the whole audience? So, of course, we're hiring a lot in New York City and Stockholm. If you're interested in design, data science, engineering, and you want to visualize the data of these 100 million music fans, email me, come find me, and talk to me. Thank you.
So yeah, those, like especially the familiar and the discovery graphs.
Yeah.
Those are absolutely beautiful and actually see it's very informative at the individual level. But how are you going to go about that using that for comparative analysis? Or just, I mean, like you said, you have an incredible user base. How are you going to actually use that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So the question is, how do you use this for 100 million users? How do you scale this up? Yeah, I mean, it's not this that you use. Part of the reason I'm not showing that bigger aggregate scale stuff is that's where all of the numbers and the information is quite sensitive. This stuff I can show. But I think kind of philosophically, we want to bring both sides to our view of data. And so at least 80–90% of what we do is more on the big scale stuff. And once it's getting to the visualization stage, visualizing aggregates that our data science team, our research team have modeled very extensively. And so an example would be to say, okay, well, this familiarity versus discovery sessions is something that might be useful. We validate that with our business users and the product designers and people who might care about that stuff. And then the data science team would figure out how can we actually measure that accurately. Let's run some pipelines that are going to do that for all users, chunk each session, and then we could say something like, all right, let's visualize how each Spotify product or these contexts, these sources of listening, how much they enable one type of session or the other. Or are users who do more discovery sessions on average more likely to convert, that kind of stuff. So by no means is this the end. This is the beginning. This is meant to spur research, to seed ideas for research, and also to spot check stuff. I may like to make it look prettier than it has to be to do that, but that's the purpose of this. Yeah.
Do you ever consider actually pushing that to users, like as a
Yeah, so the question is, could we push this to users and let you see your own history here? Yeah, I mean, whenever I show this to people, they say, yeah, I want to see my own data in there. There are things like Spotify's Year in Music, which at the end of the year does some pretty basic statistical things that talks about your listening. But yeah, we recognize that users, especially data-centric users, care about this. We'll see if it ever makes it into that kind of product level, but you can imagine the amount of data engineering and product stuff investment to do this at that scale would be a lot, so you want to be the beta tester? All right, cool. Question?
Hey, so I have a question. Have you ever done any research on how individual tastes affect taste in a clique and vice versa?
How individual taste affects what the
taste of a clique. So people who like close on a social graph, follow each other, stuff like that.
How your taste might affect your friends or other people you're connected to. We haven't done a ton. partly because the social features of Spotify have been a bit de-emphasized, especially on mobile. So in the desktop app, you can see what your friends are listening to if you're connected to them. But yeah, I think it's an interesting area. Over here. Other question?
What software did you make those drafts in, and how did you?
So both of these are D3 because they're pretty customized. The first one you could probably sort of do in Tableau. D3 is where I go for really custom experimental stuff, but yeah, we use off-the-shelf tools too, like Tableau for quicker analysis. We also our team builds analytics platforms for Spotify to use, and we have kind of a custom JavaScript React stack for doing that. But when I want to do things like this, I use D3.
Who are the primary users inside your company of tools like this? Is it the user experience team, and what kind of insights do they get out of this that have led to product decisions? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so the consumers of tools, or I guess the first one I'd call a tool, but stuff like this, this is mainly meant for us in analytics, for our research team and those trying to innovate on how we can use data and spot check our data, our models. The more platformized things that we build and the data sets that we produce are consumed by basically everyone, all departments in the company. You can imagine that Spotify is a pretty data-friendly, tech-friendly company. Everyone is very motivated to make decisions using data and back them up with data. So our products generally are used by the whole company, a lot by product and tech, but also marketing, ad sales, revenue, and content. But these things, these more experimental things, it's mainly for us.
When you do any of these experimental things, do you ever reach out to the individual user? I know when you're doing it internally, you can just ask, but what were you feeling at the moment here? We want to make this service better. What do you think as a user? Yeah,
so Spotify does regular usability or user testing with real users, not just ourselves. So every couple of weeks, they bring in a panel in different cities, and there's different questions that they focus on. In doing that, they also have access to the data to look at those people's history and talk about, what was going on here, or that kind of thing. So there's a whole formalized process for kind of getting direct feedback from real users, not just us power users. We have less than a minute. One more quick question. So yeah, everything's going to mobile. There's less social there, but I'm not really the right person to speak to that. That's more of a product decision. All right, thank you all.